Welcome, Jessica, to the Dating Intentionally podcast. I am so excited to talk to you. I'm so glad you reached out to me with your book. I mean, how are you today?
Doing really well.
Yeah.
I'm in Canada. Well, one, I'm so excited to be here. And then two, I'm in Canada where I just got a heat warning and I looked and it's 76 degrees, which is just,
Oh,
I love that about
wait.
Canada,
Okay.
that
Yeah. I'm like expecting you to say like 100. Nope.
it's 76. I saw my kid outside and then I saw the heat warning. I was like, "Oh, I hope she's drinking enough water." And then I checked. I was like, oh, it's just really temperate.
Where in Canada?
Ontario, kind of the middle
Oh,
of
nice. Are
Ontario.
you
Yeah.
live there?
Yeah,
Oh,
we live here.
nice. I mean, okay, because I was reading your book and like you talk a lot about the Bay Area. That's where I am.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Where in the Bay are you?
So I'm in the South Bay, but my mom had a
Okay.
place in Berkeley. My brother had a place in Richmond. They both moved back to the
Oh,
East Coast, but yeah. But yeah,
okay.
we've been around here. Yeah.
When we met, David was living on Lake Merritt, and I was living sort of like in the flatlands of Berkeley. And then we
Yeah.
ended up moving up to the hills when we had kids, and yeah, lived all over the area.
Amazing. Well, okay, I want to kick this off with just like what made you and your co-author want to write Dateable, your book?
So we wrote a picture book together called This Is How We Play, which now actually comes out after Dateable. And we wrote that because, well, our kids were always like, "Where's that mama's wheelchair? Where's that mama's crutches?" And we noticed there weren't disabled parents in books ever. And so we wrote that picture book. And then as we were writing it, we just started talking about our families and how we met our husbands and about the process of dating as disabled people and like how lonely it was and how much shame we both had and how we felt like no one had understood our experience. And we were like, I wish there had been a book. And then we were like, we could write it. We pitched it and a publisher bought it. And it was really, I mean, it was really fun to write and to spend time thinking about.
That is so amazing. But you've written other books too, right?
I have a book about disabled parenting coming out next year. And then we have a few other picture books coming
Amazing.
out too.
So what was most surprising part about writing a book that focused on dating while disabled?
So we going into it, we really had a more narrow view of what we would be covering. But then as I interviewed more and more disabled people, I started to realize how expansive the idea of like disabled romantic relationships are. And I ended up learning so much from the people I interviewed. I found that disabled people are much more likely to be into non-monogamy than maybe non-disabled people. Maybe I shouldn't say that if I don't actually know the stats, but it was quite common in my interviews. The views on sex were much more expansive, like what qualifies as sex. Like there was a lot more creativity around it. And then also like the disabled people I interviewed were very into like kink and like types of sex that were really fun to learn about and talk about. And I found myself like, wow, disabled people are like creative and interesting daters.
I love that. That's an amazing insight. And I definitely also got that from reading it. Like I don't know, I don't know what I expected, but it was maybe less doom and gloom. I don't know why I
Yeah.
expected a lot of that, but it was like, oh, like there's just a lot. I guess and that's true for so many things in life. Like where there are limits, that's where creativity is born. Like,
Right.
and it's I just love it. I love for listeners to hear a little bit about your story and what early dating was like for you before you met your husband.
Yes.
Yes.
So I grew up, as it turns out, I have a genetic disorder, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but I presumed I was not disabled. And I dated a lot in high school. And then I met someone and we started dating when I was 18 and we were together from 18 to 30. So I didn't date
Okay.
during my late teens or 20s. And then at 28, I became disabled very suddenly. I was on a hike with my ex in Greece and got heat exhaustion on the hike. And it really came out of nowhere. I was very active. There was really no reason I should have become so sick on the hike, but I did. And from that day forward, I could hardly walk. I could hardly sit up for any length of time. Like my body completely changed in the course of one day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah. And
Yeah.
also in another country, that's even a whole other layer of just
Yeah,
terrifying. Yeah.
it was really, really scary. And it took 2 years to get a diagnosis. And as anyone who's had, well, especially women or AFAB people, that like if you have something mysterious happen, you can like often be doubted. And that's what I experienced. I saw many doctors and they kept saying, like, are you sure you're not just too worried or hyper focused on your body? Are you sure you're not just like noticing every last thing? And I was like, literally, I cannot walk. I dropped a ton of weight. My skin turned yellow. I grew like hair all over my like these tiny little fuzzy hairs from like malnourishment. I mean, I was so ill
Hmm.
and obviously very ill. And then finally was diagnosed after about 2 years. And around that same time, also ended my 12-year relationship.
Wow. Okay. That must have been a really big year. Is that like the
Yeah.
Saturn? Okay, I'm a little bit of an astrology geek and I'm like, okay, is that like the Saturn return? Like everything just goes upside down in
Yeah.
that time
Yeah.
of your life, like 29, 30. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was 30. It was 2013. And I also, before I became disabled, was making a lot of money as a real estate agent and
Okay. Okay.
had started a real estate firm with these other women. I was on an episode of House Hunters. Like I was sort of living this like, you know, big life for a person
Yeah.
in their 20s. And then suddenly I was single, not making any money. I applied for Social Security disability, but was waiting to hear from that. So I went from like, this life that felt kind of like endless with possibility to one that felt like pretty small.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I joined the apps and started
Okay.
dating.
That's what we all
And
do, right? When something happens, like you can always just go with the apps. Just I'll
well,
figure it
I mean, it was such a weird time too because I had so much time. I wasn't able to work. So I was spending a lot of time like reading
out.
poetry and journaling and like really reflecting. And my therapist actually encouraged me to get out and to try to have fun and to try like break free of this 12-year relationship. And so I started dating and it was okay. I mean, I was coming to terms with my body, and so I really didn't know my own limits. So I would like say I could meet someone at a bar, but then the seats wouldn't be good enough for me, and I would end up spending like most of the date lying on the floor in the bathroom because I was too dizzy. Like I
Okay.
just was so ill, but not used to that new body, and obviously couldn't expect a person who didn't know me to know what I needed. But then about 10 months after diagnosis, I met someone who I ended up living with and we dated for a couple years. And that was a more serious relationship. And he's in the book. I don't know how far you got, but
I don't know if I
he's
got there yet.
okay. I believe
Yeah.
he's Christopher in the book.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but that's not his name.
Okay.
And we we dated for a while. And then he ended up breaking up with me because of my disability. He said that he wanted one, a partner who could carry children, which wasn't safe for me to do. And then two, he wanted a partner who could go on adventures with him that I couldn't do. So, like the example he gave is that he wanted to be able to go on bike rides around like Sweden, which is really specific.
It's very
And
specific. Okay.
and I just can't do that at
Hmm.
all. In some ways, like obviously a dick move, but also I appreciated his honesty that he didn't try to pretend that there was some more noble reason that he was breaking up with me. You know, I don't know. I sort of liked that he said it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Like the truth can really hurt, but it's better
Mhm.
than some fake, like protective or like trying to protect you answer. It's like you want the
Yeah.
truth, even though it is really painful.
Yeah, or if you'd been like, I just, we don't really connect, like you made up something that like I would have known in my heart wasn't true. And part of my disability means that it's hard for me to regulate my temperature very well. And so I also around that time started planning to move out to the Bay Area because I wanted to live somewhere more temperate than North Carolina, where I'm from. So I moved out there and again started dating and dated a bunch casually and just kind of had a blast. Like I was started to be much more upfront about my disability and it was a decent experience. Like I had a few people break up with me because of it or say they didn't want to take it further, but a lot of people didn't. And I was just kind of getting to know like my own limits and what I wanted in a partner. And, it's interesting. I think the part of that period that was more tricky than being disabled and dating was like what I wrote about in a modern love piece, which was like trying to date people who were nice instead of people who were assholes. Like that
Mm,
was like the bigger obstacle than, being a
right.
wheelchair user and being disabled.
I feel like that's the same for a lot of dating, like dating in
Yeah,
general. It's like it's hard to differentiate and also lean towards the people who actually treat us well compared to
right.
the assholes, depending on your attachment system and other things you've gone through.
Yeah,
Like it's
exactly.
like that's just a general experience of dating that a lot of people have, but I can yeah, it's tough. It's tough out there. But I'm so
Yeah.
glad to hear that you had fun and that you were it seems like you were treating it like an experiment. You were trying to learn, you were trying to
Mhm.
navigate, and you weren't putting too much pressure on yourself.
Yeah, I wasn't. I was really having fun. I was also enjoying like casual sex for the first time in my life in my early 30s. I'd been in that relationship for so long. And I know that is a part of why we wanted to write the book too, is there's all these assumptions about disabled people being kind of like desexualized or infantilized and like not being sexual people. And the book's not like highly explicit or anything, but we wanted to make it clear that it is like possible and, like likely that disabled people have active and interesting sex lives.
Hell yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I again love it. And so I have a lot of questions from our audience. I will link the Modern Love piece in the show notes so people can read about how you met your husband and what was different about that. And listeners, like, please go read it because it's well written and charming piece. It's honestly like I teared up reading it because it was just
Thank
really sweet.
you.
Yeah, it was really great. Okay, so let's dive in. The number one
Okay.
question that you do cover extensively in the book, but we should tell listeners, I feel like this information is really important, is
Yeah.
is how and when do you tell someone in early dating that you have a disability or chronic illness? Like
Oh,
let's talk about the
yeah.
when first. I think the timing of this. And I know it's different for everyone, but I would love to hear from you.
Well, I mean, we talk about that a lot in the book, and that was always really hard for me. I mean, I think one approach I've seen people take online to this question is, well, why would you lead with a negative thing about you? And I always want to answer that, well, I don't think it's a negative thing. Like, I think in reality, my disability is a part of me. It's like a inherent part of my personality, but it's not a downside to being with me. That said, there's so many assumptions about disability that leading with it can make the person hearing that news like bring in all of these assumptions that they have of what it is to be disabled, and then they're no longer able to see you. And
Interesting.
so
Okay.
I don't like my approach was often to tell someone on like the first time hanging out for any length of time.
So in
Um,
person, when you
in
get to the
person.
in-person part,
Mhm.
that's when and I guess your disability did you present it as visible, invisible? Like, because I know that you do use a wheelchair sometimes and like,
Yeah,
so that's also, but it's like it's like you also have the choice, daters have the choice of revealing certain things on their profile or like
right.
immediately if it's more visible, right?
Right, right. Yeah, I guess I should say so. I can walk for about 30 seconds unassisted, and I can sit upright without support for about 5 minutes. So, like, I kind of can be, present as non-disabled, but it's pretty tricky. Like, I can't just enter any situation and
Hmm.
seem non-disabled. And I now use a power wheelchair when I'm out of the house almost all the time, because there are very few places you can go in public where you only have to walk 30 seconds and sit
Yeah,
for like you
right,
just almost always have to walk or sit. But I would often date in a way that I would not necessarily have to mention it in the first couple minutes. My first date with my husband, we met at a park on a bench where I could kind of like recline and keep my feet up. But I would normally mention it the first time hanging out. I would also often plan dates and locations where I knew I could manage. So there were certain coffee shops or bars that had couches in Oakland, and I would
mm,
try to go there. And that approach, which may not be right for everyone, and obviously different if you have a apparent disability, but that was so that they would meet me and then hear this part about me that again, I don't think is like and it's also not sneaky. It's not saying like, oh, trick, here's a bad thing. I'm just saying, here's a part of me that you didn't yet know. And there's also like a
Yes.
lot of parts of me you don't yet know. Like we just met.
Can I share one experience I had with you?
Yeah.
Because I dated a lot of people and look, like I'm a very open-minded person. I dated outside my
Hmm.
race. I really pushed myself to date
Hmm.
people without being like, oh, are they my type? I really wanted to get out there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did go on a date with this guy who is just like a white guy, whatever. So maybe not describe, but okay. So we chat online, we like met up,
Uh-huh.
and on the date, I noticed he was kind of standing, hiding his hand, and then whatever he had, whatever disability he had, did not come up. He did not share this, but it was visible, it was present that there was something
Yeah.
that was different about his hand, and like I wish he had brought it up because it wasn't on his dating profile and it didn't come up on the date, but it was just very much like you're just a
Yeah.
guy, like you're a normal person, you know?
Hmm.
And but it's
Hmm.
like also let's like talk about this. And it was just, the date,
Right.
you didn't have a second date and part of it, like I didn't feel deceived really, but I just
Hmm.
wish he would have said something. Because I was curious, but it's also like I don't know, I'm not gonna just ask like what's up with your
Right.
hand. Like, that's not like a question I feel comfortable asking a
Yeah.
stranger as I'm getting to know them romantically. So I don't know.
I
What
mean,
do you
it's a
think
real
about
like
this?
ethical dilemma because I would say one pet peeve of mine is if I'm in public, and this happens quite frequently, is that a stranger will yell, "What's wrong with you?"
Oh my
or "Why
God.
can't you walk?" or "What happened to you?" And I'm always like, listen,
What?
buddy, like that's that's my business. Like you don't
Yeah.
have the right to just learn about me
Right.
in public. But dating is a little tricky because you are getting to know each other like ostensibly to form a relationship and to like have a partnership. So there is some like curiosity in that setting is really natural and normal.
True.
So I don't know. I think it would be totally appropriate to say like, hey, I noticed this. Are you comfortable talking about it? And I also think like I would imagine he had been hurt so many times by people like rejecting him for his disability that maybe he was scared.
Yes.
I would encourage someone like, as a disabled person, now I would say like anyone you are going to want to date is going to be able to handle you describing like at least the surface level truth about yourself.
Right.
And
Just
so
the
it's a
one
good way
liner.
to,
The like,
yeah,
yeah,
you don't have to
just
say like every hospitalization, but just
yeah.
like so I do think I don't know, I would encourage people to like explore the idea of being open at just like surface level about your
Mhm.
disability. And it's a good way to weed people out.
Okay, so if we had this conversation before I went on that date, I could have asked and been like, "Hey, I'm just like curious about your hand." Like, I don't know, or
Yeah.
like,
Is this something you're
is it that
comfortable
you,
talking
yeah, are
about?
you open talking about it? And
Yeah.
obviously, like, yeah, if he said no, it's like no harm, like whatever,
Hmm.
move on to the next subject.
Yeah.
I've had people say that when you bring up exes, like I'm not comfortable
Mm.
talking about that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like, great.
Right. I think asking that question can feel vulnerable. Are you comfortable talking about this? Because it's like slightly confrontational and also saying no feels slightly confrontational. But
Hmm.
I think we all need to like, and I've, listening to your podcast, I think you believe in this too, that we all need to get a little okay with that like slight discomfort.
Because
Um,
the other side of that is like maybe that guy has never been asked on a first date and he's
yeah.
so happy that someone actually had the guts to like
Yeah.
ask, and care and like not be afraid, you know?
Right. Right.
So I
Right.
think there's also the positive, like, oh yeah, like great, someone actually is open and not weirded out by this, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I could tell he was
And
really insecure though, like because of the way he
yeah.
was standing initially, and
Mm.
I'm sure he'd been having that posture his whole life. Like that what it
Yeah.
seemed like to me.
And probably a result of the way people had treated him. I will also say, I think so much of my attitude comes from going so long without being disabled. I sort of carry with me the entitlement of someone who was not disabled for 28 years, and I expect people to like me and to accept me. And so I maybe went into dating with more confidence because I
Right.
hadn't been hurt so often as a disabled person.
So on your dates, okay, so you have the first meeting. How do you bring it up? Is it just like out of the blue? Like, what was your entry point to this conversation?
always came up really naturally because they would say, why did you move to the Bay Area? Or what were you doing before this? Or talking about work. And so it actually, like, I would have so many opportunities. So when I felt comfortable, it was so easy for me to just work it into my story. Like, do you travel? Oh, actually, yeah, my life totally changed in Greece. Like, yeah,
Right.
it's just,
Right. Okay. I love
yeah.
that tip. I think people really overthink this on dates. And this
Hmm.
goes for not just disability, but so many people are, I talk to people every day about this, and it's like
Hmm.
they're scared of talking about something traumatic. It's like, oh, or
Hmm.
they've never been in a relationship before. It's like, when do I say this? How do I say this? And a lot of times you can say it at an organic point in the conversation,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be this big, scary truth bomb. Right. It's
Hmm.
like just, it's
Hmm.
like you said, it's a part of who you are. It's not a negative. It's just
Right.
literally a part of who you are. Yeah.
I think about during that time when I was meeting people in the Bay Area, and this isn't dating specific, but I went on a group trip to Tahoe and didn't tell anyone I was disabled, weirdly. Like I just wasn't comfortable with the group yet. So what ended up happening is they would all go skiing and I would just sort of like quietly read in the house and never go skiing. And I never told anyone why. And I also never helped cook or clean. And everyone must have been like, who is that girl on this trip?
Oh man. I mean, yeah, that's but like okay, in hindsight, what do you think you would have done differently?
I would have picked one person to tell and let
Okay.
them tell everyone because I think the thing that made me nervous is this idea of making a group announcement in front of a bunch of people I like was casual friends with.
It's like the opposite of an intervention. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, everyone sit
everyone
down.
gather around.
Yeah.
I can't really stand up. And so I just could imagine them all whispering like, "Hey, have you
Oh
noticed like
no.
she doesn't do anything?"
Wow.
Yeah.
That's actually it's kind of funny. Okay, so again, you go into this in your book really in depth. I just want to touch on it
Yeah.
really quickly. Disclosing your disability on your dating profile, whether it's visible or not. Like from after you're writing a book, what's your general like advice for that?
To be honest, I don't know. I still might
Okay.
not. I mean, I can see the argument for doing it, and my co-author would say definitely do it. She thinks like just already like get to the people who are cool. I feel like there are people who just need to be educated, and I'm better doing that either like over Zoom or in person. And so I would say maybe not disclose, but tell people early on. But it's up to an individual's comfort. And again, like if you have an apparent disability, that's not a choice that you're
Mm,
necessarily
right, of course.
making.
Right, very
Yeah.
true. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you did write in your book about how you had this whole conversation with your husband, like if you disclosed that on your profile, would he have swiped
Yeah.
right? And he said,
Said no.
basically said, doesn't know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's scary to think about, you know.
Yeah. And we
Um,
have a whole life. Like
And I think,
we,
yeah, but I think my general approach to all these things is like testing, like just experimenting, because you can
Mhm.
change a dating profile. You
Right.
can make adjustments. So you can try it, sharing something in a prompt for like 2 weeks and then see how that goes,
Hmm.
and then change it for another 2 weeks and see how that goes. And you can figure out what works and what feels comfortable for you, right? You
Right.
don't have to force
Right.
yourself to disclose it. If you don't, yeah, like you have the option of doing your method of sharing on the first date. But
Also, I will say do not lie. That was something I was really
yeah.
strict about. Like if it said job, I didn't pretend I was working,
Hmm.
I made jokes. I said like I like sitting down and reading a lot. I didn't paint myself to be an athlete, like always on the go. So I didn't want to attract people who were looking for a person that that I'm not.
So this is a question that came from one of my listeners. Do you have any tips about talking about viral safety, or maybe if someone is concerned about fainting or getting dizzy or suddenly not being able to walk on a date, especially in an early dating situation when, everything's new?
Yeah. Okay. So the first question, the first part, did you say viral safety?
Yeah, viral safety,
Like
like,
COVID?
yeah, or like any other, I don't know, just
Any other virus?
concerns. Yeah.
Okay, but not STI. You're not talking about
No,
like,
no, no, no.
okay. I was like, I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's kind of the same for everyone with that.
Yeah, 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 with that. Yeah.
Kind of two safety questions. So the first part, I think it's really smart to be upfront on your profile about that. And I also think like in some way, well, in many ways, COVID mitigation or other viral mitigation is like a disability rights issue. And I think it's a good way to kind of weed out people who are probably going to be able to support you in general. Like if you say like, I prefer testing before dates, or I like to mask in indoor settings. Like I don't know. I think someone who is comfortable with that it's a good litmus test. I would put that on a profile. I mean, if I were out there dating now, I would think it was really hot if someone mentioned their like level of comfort with with illnesses. I think
Yeah.
that's great.
Okay. And then what about the like warning or giving someone a heads up of like what to do if they faint, get dizzy, or can't walk suddenly? Which I know you have pictures of you like getting dizzy on a date and lying down in the
Yeah.
park. There's one I was like, I'm not being cute. I just got dizzy.
Yeah. Yeah, that I mean, I spend so much time lying down on dates. I mean, it's so hard because I really think you need to be so careful about safety in dating as a disabled person. Something we encountered, and we interviewed dozens and dozens of people for this book. We didn't interview, well, very few people who had not experienced sexual assault as a disabled person. It is so, so common statistically. It's just so much more common. And I would be really aware of who you're on a date with if it's early and telling them about ways that you essentially can't run away. Like I would try to date in settings where there are other people who could protect you. So one, be upfront with your date about your physical needs and what they should do if you were to get dizzy. But two, like don't be alone with someone and then also telling them like, hey, heads up, I like might just lie down unconscious. Like I think really it's so
Mhm.
imperative to be aware of safety, and it shouldn't be necessary, but it's so important for disabled people.
That's a really good point. I didn't even think of that aspect of safety, just like no, literally not being able to defend or get away if you need
Yeah.
to in certain situations. Like, yeah. So generally your tip is like other than instructing someone, hopefully you trust at that point what to
Mhm.
do,
Yeah.
going to having dates in public settings, sharing your location with a friend, telling people where you
Yes.
are. Yeah. Yeah.
Getting last names. I was so safety conscious dating. I also, I drink alcohol, but not very much. And when I would drink on dates, I never left my drink alone with a guy. Like probably much longer into a relationship than most people do. Like
Okay.
I would not drink my wine after returning to the table if I had gone to the bathroom because I'm so aware of how fragile my body is and I can't get away. And so
Mhm.
I just stayed like pretty vigilant until far into a relationship. And I think
I
that's,
hate that this is something we even need to talk about, but it's so true. Like,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And then obviously there are many other challenges with dating as a disabled person, and they vary a lot. And when reading your
Hmm.
book, one thing I had not thought about also was bathroom stuff. You have a whole section on bathroom stuff that really
Yeah.
opened my eyes. So, okay, other than the challenges we've already discussed, like bathroom stuff,
Hmm.
disclosing this information, and safety, what are some other challenges about dating that we might not think about for disabled people?
I think something that came up a lot in my interviews and then also came up for me personally was that there's certain like subgroups and like a lot of queer culture that is not accessible. And
Mm,
so I interviewed a lot of queer people that would be like, yeah, all the best queer bars have stairs. And I write about in the book how there's this whole history of the like LGBTQ movement being sort of like underground and like
right.
alternative culture. But like if it's literally underground, we can't get there. And so I think that came up more than I expected is that the queer people I interview were like, hey, we really feel left out. Like there's this celebration of a particular type of body, particularly in certain subcultures of queer community, and that like we don't feel welcome there as
Hmm.
disabled people. And it's supposed to be this like anyone is welcome, but it doesn't often feel that way in like a very physical access sense or in a sort of attitude.
That's so interesting to think about. It's like literally these spaces at gay bars are like one story below ground or
Yes.
like just
Yeah.
okay. Wow. Yeah, I love like just learning about these things you just would not think of. It really expands my view and hopefully listeners' view. Okay, here's another one that came up a lot in
Yeah.
my questions for you, which is just tips for dealing with rejection based on your disability. Rejection
Ugh,
sucks for all daters, but then when it's like
yeah.
that, it's just I can only imagine how bad it feels.
I mean, it happened to me a bunch. One guy broke up with me. He said he just couldn't see himself loving me, but then he texted his friend saying like she was just too disabled. I couldn't imagine a life with her, but he accidentally texted that to me. So I got a text saying I was too disabled. And I was like, I think you didn't mean to send this to me.
Rookie
Uh,
move. Rookie.
so, I mean,
Yeah. Go
Oh, I
on.
cannot imagine how his stomach dropped. And then
Oh no. Okay.
And then, I opened the book with the story of this guy and we were really hitting it off. And then as soon as I told him that I was disabled, he just like really pulled back. And then what I don't get into in the book is that I didn't have any self-respect and I like continued sleeping with him for months and like
Oh
just
no.
like
Okay.
yeah, but
Oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah, he
Look,
pulled back and he
this
wasn't going to commit to me, but I didn't.
damn. I mean, look, it's like it's a shitty rite of passage in dating. It's just to
Yeah.
like keep sleeping with someone that does not want you. And
Yeah.
it's like how we learn. I
It's
don't,
so
it's like
embarrassing.
it's a pain I wish I could spare people, but I feel like also it's like it just what happens in dating eventually.
A few years later, I got a text from him out of the blue and said, "Hey, can you call me?" And I was like, "Oh shit, he has an STI." But he actually was texting to find out where I buy my phone cases because he really liked my phone case, which
That
is a
is
really
the most random. It's even like it's like at least okay. Wow, that's so random. Usually people text you on your birthday if they're trying to get back in touch with you, you know? It's just phone
when he was
case.
like, "Hey, can you call?" Um, but so I guess all that to say, I've been there from my perspective now. I would say that every person who wasn't interested in me because of my disability, I would hate to be partnered with them. Like, I imagine my life with any of those people, and especially because I'm in sort of the thick of things as the mom of young kids. Oh my gosh, like, their perspective on, like, what makes a good life, on what makes a good day, on what kind of challenge is worth taking on, like, their capacity for struggle is so small,
Mhm.
and life has so much struggle and requires so much creativity and openness, and parenting young kids, if that's something you're interested in, it requires so much, like, resilience that I don't want any of those people who couldn't take it on, like, truly, 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 I would not wanna be a partner with any of them. And so I will say, like, from the future, I will tell you you're better off. Truly, you're better off. I do not want
Yeah.
any of those people.
Great advice. Seriously, great reframe. I mean, we always say rejection is redirection. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's like you want someone who's all in. And everyone, like even like disability is a whole other thing, but everyone has
Mhm.
something like to
Yeah.
deal with. And it's like you want to find someone who's fully game to deal with that and not yeah, I love your advice. That's great. You probably have run into this. What advice do you have for dealing with like people making insensitive comments or ableism from like potential partners? Just like people that who like mean
Yeah.
well, they're interested, they're like, into it, but like then they just make a comment or something that just like, okay, what?
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard because something like that, it's not just through the lens of like, "Oh, you're not being politically correct," which I think it's really through the lens of like a disabled person has been hurt so many times, and if someone pokes at that bruise, it's really painful. And so I think one, you have the right to be mad, but also if you have the capacity, it's kind of worth educating someone if you're interested in them otherwise.
That makes
You know,
sense.
I have someone I care about recently said about another person I care about, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear they're autistic, like, that must make their life so hard," and I was at first, like, really hurt, and then I said, actually, I don't think autism is a bad thing. I think there's so many beautiful things about autism, and, like, this is my approach to it," and, like, I was able to, like, come from a place of, like, "Here, this is actually what I think about it," and offering that, if you're really hurt, you're really hurt, but if you can educate someone, I think it's worth doing. I think,
Hmm.
we all have to learn. I learned about disability when I became disabled.
Right, right.
And I don't know, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And there's also a difference in like being repeatedly hurtful versus making like an ignorant comment that you just haven't been,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
informed.
I like that approach of just like it's an opportunity. If you care and if you
Yeah.
feel like investing, and if not, I
Mhm.
guess it's a signal to maybe
Yeah.
move on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a few more questions, but this one's really important. How can people who are disabled build more self-confidence? Because you came into dating with more confidence because of your past dating experiences, which makes
Yeah.
sense. Like you had kind of like you dated, you had experience, you had long relationships, like you'd gone through that. What would
Mhm.
you say to people who are starting from zero and have a disability?
I truly think that disabled people are often like exceptionally creative and funny and interesting. We're just like a real innovative group. We also like often have really good attitudes. Like we're adept at handling inconvenient situations where I don't know. I think as much as you can remind yourself that you are uniquely great to date and to be partnered with and believe it, like I think that can help. I was thinking about this before you and I talked. And I truly think I'm a great person to be partnered to. I think like I definitely have a lot of physical limitations, and I think I'm a really good partner and wife and mom. And I don't think my husband is worse off because he married a disabled person. And he doesn't think so either. I'm not
Yeah,
just like
clearly.
making him like
Yeah.
reminding him of that all the time. I think if I had gone into this with less confidence, my confidence would have grown from spending more time with disabled people. Because when I was doing interviews for this book and the conversations I was having with disabled people, I was just like, damn, what a crew. Like, what an
Hmm.
interesting group of people that I am so lucky to count myself among. And I think that would have really grown my confidence, like if I were dating. So I'd say connecting with the other disabled people, other disabled like singles. There's a couple apps that
I
help with
loved reading
disabled.
about the apps. That was
Yeah.
so cool. I was like, this is amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
there's one
ahead.
called Dateability, which sort of sounds like the name of our book, but we're not connected. I don't like also have an app, and that's helping disabled people date. And then there's one called Know Me, I believe, and that's for neurodivergent people in friendship. And they're both great, I think, just for helping build those connections. But truly, I really don't think it is worse to be partnered with a disabled person than a non-disabled person.
Yeah, it comes from that core, but the confidence comes from that core belief, which I really hope
Mhm.
listeners can have no matter what you are going through, what you believe about yourself. I really hope you can believe that you have something to offer. Because I think a lot of people don't,
Yeah.
able-bodied or not, like that
Mhm.
is definitely a big issue I see in the dating world, which is
Yeah.
something I'm trying to help people with. And I loved, yeah, honestly, when you wrote in your book, like the point about how the mainstream apps don't have a selection for anything related really blew my mind to think. I was like, wait, we have our star signs and like
So dumb.
BS stuff like that, and we don't have like a I use a wheelchair box or like a, I don't know, just something like
Yeah.
or like I don't
Deaf or
yeah, I'm deaf.
anything?
Yeah, like
It's
yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's so
it's
ridiculous.
I think it's like that would be such an easy thing to add, and it's just so
Mhm.
I couldn't only imagine how many more connections people would make if they realized like they're oh I'm messaging with another deaf person or like I'm messaging with another person who uses a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, just like they feeling less alone, feeling more seen.
Mhm.
I want it to happen. I really do. I hope one day it does.
Seriously, yeah, hello dating apps because also I think people would disclose a lot more frequently on the apps
If it was
and
a
we would all have
box,
if it were a box because then you
yeah.
wouldn't have to make this announcement and then you'd be like, "Oh, a lot of people are actually disabled," instead of being like the one disabled person
Yes.
on the app.
Yes.
I did want to say one more thing about confidence. Something that came up a lot writing the book is people who stuck in relationships because their disability made them feel like that's all they deserved. And a few people we interviewed stayed in abusive situations because they thought they couldn't get anyone else. And something I would love for people to believe is that you do not deserve to be mistreated in a relationship emotionally or physically or sexually. Like, simply do not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah,
It's better to be
do
alone.
not
It's
stay.
better to be
It's better.
alone. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
get out.
Great. Yeah. Seriously. That's great advice. I appreciate this so much. And before we wrap up, I want to quickly touch on what able-bodied daters need to know or what we can do when we encounter someone in their dating journey with a chronic illness or disability. Like, is there one thing, other than having an open mind, which is like
Yeah,
so important?
yeah. I'd say often, particularly like if I when I was dating men, the first question a guy would ask is like, "Can you still have sex?" And I would say that's not the ideal first question. Like,
It's just the golden rule of dating anyone. It's like, don't bring up sex in the first time you're talking to someone. Like, just don't do
yeah,
it. Don't, you're not going to go
yeah,
anywhere doing that. Oh my gosh.
no,
I'm sorry that happened to
but
you.
what I would say is say, what would you like to share? And how can I support you right now?
Okay, love those are two amazing questions. I think everyone should adopt in their early
Yeah.
dating conversations about sensitive things or things that are like feel like unknown or just
Yeah.
unfamiliar.
I would say one thing I just thought of, because I know you're bi, like if you were to tell a guy on a first date, like, hey, I'm bi, what are the things you would want him to say to that? I mean, probably not how can I support you right now? Because that'd be a weird thing to
Yeah, I
say,
guess
but
like if
like,
I said that, I guess I would probably welcome just curiosity of like, oh, when did
yeah,
you realize that? Like
yeah,
kind of like a something that a friend would ask me. It's like not sexual, but it's still showing. It's still like I'm mentioning this because I want to be asked or like I want you to know. So
yeah,
like I'm sharing this. So it's like you can ask, but it's not. Don't make it weird. You know?
yeah. I'd say it's exactly that level.
Yeah.
Like if someone were to disclose their sexual orientation, how would you respond?
Right. Yeah. Like what's the story behind that? Or just
Mhm.
like, just showing more curiosity from a friendship level for sure. That's a great way to put it. Okay. What do you want to see more of in dating in general? Just in the whole culture.
Something that disabled people, at least in our interviews, really showed is a level of creativity with dating and a level of communication of like, what are you looking for from a relationship? What are you looking for eventually, sexually? You know, are you monogamous? Are you not? Do you eventually want to live with partners? Like, there was just a lot more openness around identity and life goals, and there wasn't as much prescription, like a prescriptive assumption about what life should look like. And I think that would be wonderful to have in dating in general, like to not have an assumption about where this is going as far as two partners, married, with kids, which is obviously
Mhm.
what I'm doing. But I think there's like so much out there, and that level of creativity is lovely.
So you would like to see more of those conversations up front without all the heavy like pressure of just like,
Yeah.
okay, like actually, what do you want? What are you doing? What are your goals?
Yeah.
What do you see for yourself? I agree. I want to see more of that too. I think in dating it gets so like, oh well, if we talk about it on our date, like, oh, you mean you're gonna want to marry me? We just met. Like it's
Yeah.
that's like the vibe. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
it's like it's not all about you, person I'm
Yeah.
dating. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Jessica, this has been an amazing conversation. I just can't wait for people to hear it. Where can we get more of you? Where can we find you?
My website is jessicaslice.com, and same on Instagram. And then I have a newsletter that comes out monthly. So any of those places. And if there are a lot of follow-up questions to this, just let me know. Like I'm happy to do Q&A on Instagram, or if you'd want me back here to talk more about disabled dating. I just feel like there's such a dearth of these
Oh yeah,
conversations.
I had like three times as more questions on my outline than we got to. So
Okay.
yeah, so I would love to have you back for sure. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.